At Lowe's, we know you're full of bright ideas, but you can't show off your home improvements without the proper lighting. Luckily, we're here to help with some great offers. Right now, you can find a 6-pack of energy-efficient soft white CFL bulbs for just $6, was $8.98. Or pick up a 6-pack of 65-watt indoor floodlights for recessed lighting, also just $6, was $14.98. We're turning on the savings across the store. Lowe's, never stop improving. Offers valid through 11/18/11. Some restrictions apply. See store for details.
Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Just Energy Radio with your host, naturopath and medical intuitive, Dr. Rita Louise. We have learned from Einstein's theory that matter and energy are one. Physicists believe that all systems in nature have their own particular way of vibrating. From the swinging of a pendulum to the waves of the ocean to the light that brightens the sky each day, each of these oscillates at its own unique rate. The same holds true for every thought, feeling, event, or word we speak. Each has its own frequency or rate of vibration. What many of us don't realize is when we take everything in our universe down to its simplest form, it is all just energy. Join Dr. Rita Louise on a journey through time and space where past, present, and future collide. Today, what you believe may be called into question. What we want to know is, who made up the rules? Be brave and step outside the box. We are about to turn our world upside down and venture into the unknown. Hold on. We are departing our own beliefs and entering alternative realms. Enjoy the possibilities.
Hello and welcome to Just Energy Radio. I'm your host, Dr. Rita Louise, and thank you all for tuning into the show today. You know, I'm kind of getting tired of saying this, but yet another excellent lineup this week. In the first hour, we're going to be speaking to Hugh Newman about the Maya and their megalithic origins. And in the second hour, we're going to be speaking with Philip Coppens about the Odyssey of the Gods. But before I bring Hugh on, let me make a few announcements. As always, Just Energy Radio is brought to you by soulhealer.com. That's soulhealer.com. And the Institute of Applied Energetics, appliedenergeticsinstitute.com. And so I know everyone listening is like getting on a plane or a train or a bus and heading into Austin for the Central Texas Paranormal Conference. I'll be there. My good friend Dash Beardley will be there. The Kling brothers, Fiona Broom, Dustin Perry, Jeannie Plummer, Aaron Houdini, the last Houdini, and many more people. It is going to be a blast. Come hang out with us. That's the Central Texas Paranormal Conference this weekend in Austin, Texas. Their webpage is ctparacon, so ctparacon.com. In a couple more weeks is the 2011 ASPE Paranormal Symposium. It's scheduled for October 23rd through 30th in Taos, New Mexico. Many of the people that we've had on the show, Marie Jones, Larry Flaxman, some new friends we're going to be meeting here in the next couple of weeks. Scott Roberts and Edmund Gomez are going to be there talking about a variety of topics. That's the ASPE Paranormal Symposium, October 23rd through 30th. Their webpage is aspesymposium.com. And one of my favorite shows that you've heard me speak a lot about on this show is the History, Haunts, and Legends Conference scheduled for November 5th in spooky Jefferson, Texas. Speakers all day, ghost hunting all night, get your tickets early. Definitely book your reservations early if you want to get a spooky room in a haunted hotel and maybe have a ghost hang out with you at night. It could happen, and it's a lot of fun. Anyway, moving along, let me tell you a little bit about Hugh and get him on the air because I think this is going to be yet another exciting interview. Hugh Newman is an earth mysteries and esoteric science researcher. He organizes the Megalithomania Conferences, co-edits Avalon Rising magazine, and coordinates talks, films, and workshops at numerous festivals. He has researched the Indigo children phenomena and published a book on the subject. His most recent book, Earth Grids, has been published by Wooden Books. He is an honorary member of the Antiquarian, I could say that a minute ago, Society, and has spoken at conferences in the UK, Malta, France, Peru, and North America. So please welcome from megalithomania.co.uk. Let me repeat that. That's megalithomania.co.uk, Hugh Newman. Hey, Hugh, are you there?
I'm here. Yes, thanks for having me on the show.
Thanks so much for coming on the show. Hugh, I have a ton of questions, so we're just going to, jump into it. But before we get into the real meat, how did you get interested in Earth mysteries and megalithomania or megalithic construction in the first place?
Well, I really got drawn into the whole subject through actually the study of crop circles. I'm sure you've had people on your show talking about those before, where these amazing patterns appear in the wheat and crop fields in Britain and all over the world, really. And they kind of draw you into the ancient sacred landscape because they always appear near ancient sites, near megalithic sites, and I think there is a deep connection between the two, to be honest with you. And so I kind of got drawn in by that, actually. I started studying the earth energies and all the strange phenomena around these crop circles. And really I really wasn't that interested in ancient history like 15 years ago or something like that. But then it kind of drew me in, and I just realized how important these ancient sites are. And I got influenced when I started researching and reading books from John Michell and David Hatcher-Childress and others. And it really opened up a whole world of what was really going on in prehistory, where there was a much more shamanic way of life. They were working with subtle energies, and they seemed to be this golden era, this golden age, which this sort of higher consciousness was obviously present at. And I think a lot of us are looking for that kind of energy again and that kind of consciousness again as we approach 2012. So I think that's kind of what really drew me in. And since then, I've become, an official megalithomaniac. I just really can't get enough of go to as many of these sites all around the planet as possible.
You have put together an event called Megalithomania, and I was wondering if we could just kind of talk about that for a second, because I love the name of the event. But what's that all about?
Well, just first of all, the name came from a book by John Michell, who's a legendary author who unfortunately died a couple of years ago, and he was part of our conference. And the book and the conference really are about people who just get excited and blown away and have, these revelations about the stones. And I don't know why, but they just have to keep visiting these sites. And, you become a megalithomaniac, and you just can't get enough of them. So we founded a conference with my friends John Michell and John Martineau and Gareth Mills back in 2005, 2006. Since then, it's just grown and grown, and now we're doing stuff in America and South Africa and tours to Peru and Egypt and other things. And it's just a natural progression, really, where we just really want to get many of the top authors and researchers and also lesser-known researchers who don't often get a chance to present their work, to get them all on the same stage and in a forum situation where we can do lectures, go on tours and discuss it. And we're actually going to be over in America very soon on 21st and 23rd of October. We're going to be in Glastonbury, Connecticut, where we're holding a conference there. People can check out the website for more info on that. But and we're going to be doing some tours. This really is the important stuff, is getting out to these sites and actually feeling into them and kind of seeing what's going on there. You can studying them from different perspectives, and we cover as many different themes as possible. Really, it's like I do as a researcher. You kind of go into the megaliths or the ancient sites from as many different angles as possible, and don't have any agenda. You just go in there, looking for the truth, really. And often the most bizarre and amazing thing comes out when you're actually going like that and going researching from that perspective. So this is the kind of approach we have to the conference. We don't have an agenda. We just want to get as many different, subjects and different sites and ancient cultures discussed at the conference as possible. And if people can, find out more on the website, obviously, and see where we're at.
And that would be megalithomania.co.uk. One of the things that I think is very exciting about the event is that it's not in the same place. It's not like in L.A. or in New York or in England every year. You go around to different locations around the world, which adds even more excitement to it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something, we're very fascinated by. For the first 5 years, really, we didn't really budge from Glastonbury in England. We decided to do Glastonbury in America as well this month. But Glastonbury in England is like the cosmic kind of, far out town, a bit like, I guess, Sedona is and other places are in America. And so it really sort of came from there. And that's a very sacred area, a very ancient, sacred landscape. But and then naturally, as you start discussing these ancient sites, you realize there's a whole world of them. I mean, almost every country on the planet has megalithic sites. I was just looking at something just now before I came on the show about a stone circle that's been discovered in Australia, not that far from Melbourne. And it's all aligned to the stars and the sun and the moon, just like Stonehenge is. So you realize there's a real global ancient phenomenon going on here. And really, it's only just been started to be looked at again, I think, in the last maybe decade or so, with any real enthusiasm and passion. It was always in the hands of like the archaeologists and the historians, and it can make it very boring for people, and actually they're not boring. If you go in and you look at, you go in it with all these different perspectives and ideas, they're very amazing and mind-blowing, and you have experiences and you find out research and you find synchronicities. So there's a whole sort of more exciting way of, exploring these sites. And we now go to South Africa every year with Michael Tellinger. He's a brilliant researcher from Johannesburg, and he's been researching Adam's Calendar and other megalithic sites down there. We do every March we go down there. And Connecticut, which is going to be our first one there, in New England. And the reason we really chose that area is because of all the megalithic sites there. I mean, I don't know if people realize this, but there's so many ancient megalithic sites.
And could you talk about that a little bit? That was my question was, okay, Connecticut? What's there? I'm from New York. Connecticut?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Connecticut is almost like the area we are. It's almost in the center of where all the megalithic activity. That's one of the reasons we chose that area. And also because it's called Glastonbury, we couldn't help ourselves, and we had to go with that. And but we're quite near. There's actually some really interesting sites in New York State, a place called North Salem. There's a site called Balanced Rock, which is only an hour and a half, I think, from New York City. And it's an incredible dolmen. It's built upon this major magnetic anomaly. There's all these energies there. It just shouldn't be there. It's just on a highway next to a fire station, which is really bizarre. And there's been lots of tests done on that by John Burke and other researchers and other scientists. And I went there a few years ago. I did a whole trip around the whole of New England, and I was absolutely stunned by what I was just like. It was just like being in rural England, really. You could just, it's like going over all the megaliths here. But in Connecticut, you have places like Gunjewamp, and you have these several chambers scattered around the area. You get lots more in New York State. You get the whole Kent Cliffs, all the chambers there, Putnam City, and also Paterson. And then you go into Massachusetts. There's lots of sites all around there. Up into New Hampshire, you have Mystery Hill, America's Stonehenge, and several other chambers. There's a chamber called the Beehive Chamber. There's a Druid Hill Stone Circle. You head up into Vermont, and you have Calendar 1 and Calendar 2, which are major megalithic chamber complexes that spread over, a few miles even. And so you can just keep finding things, and you get these dolmens and balanced rocks in New Jersey and Rhode Island, all over the place. And so it's a really interesting landscape to throw our conference in the middle of. And this is one of the reasons, we choose these particular places, is because we do tours after, for Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday after the conference. We have 3 full-day tours, one day we go to New York State and we check out all the sites. The next day we go up to Gunjewamp and all the sites in Connecticut, Massachusetts. Then we go up to New Hampshire for the 3rd day, go to the finale, America's Stonehenge. So yeah, there's a lot to see out there, and we didn't really want to. We were thinking of going into Boston or New York or somewhere like that, but we kind of got pulled sort of in between, and so it makes it easy access to get out to the landscape, and I think that's a really important way of approaching it, especially when it's all about the landscape.
Well, I guess the next time I go to New York to see my family, I might not be seeing my family so much. I'm going, dang, I didn't know there was all that stuff there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was probably like right down the street, and I didn't even know it.
That is certainly possible. I tell you that. There's a lot of sites are actually on private land, and a lot of them aren't even recognised as sites. I mean, this is actually one of the problems with the whole situation in New England is the fact that many of the sites aren't recognised as megalithic or ancient or even sacred or anything. They're seen as colonial root cellars, where the early settlers from Ireland and Europe, etc., would supposedly store their potatoes and vegetables. And if they're going to, you would not build megalithic chambers for that with 20 or 30 ton blocks. It's a job and a half. You know, you don't do that. You can just build a shed. You can just build a basic cave type thing. And so that is the problem. So a lot of sites actually get damaged. There's construction projects, road widening schemes, and they actually get damaged because of this, because they're not recognised by the archaeologists and the historians of the areas. So thank God there's groups like NERA, or the New England Antiquities Research Association, who protect these sites and educate people about them and sort of promote them as such. And I think it's very important that they are recognised as being very important and very interesting and part of our ancestors' way of life.
That's great. A whole new appreciation. Let's kind of change subjects, because we were supposed to be talking about the megalithic building of the Mayas, but this was fascinating. I've just learned a whole new piece of history from my hometown. When we're talking about megalithic structures of the Maya, are we talking about the same culture that built Chichen Itza or Tikal or Palenque, or are we talking about somebody else?
Well, I mean, when you go to Mexico, I've been there twice. I've spent in total about 6 or 7 months exploring Mexico over the years, and I'm very interested in who was around before the Maya, because the Maya were kind of like the famous culture who supposedly invented this calendar, all these amazing pyramid sites and things like this. However, when you go back a bit further and start digging into, who else was there before the Maya, because the Maya really have only been around since around, the time of Christ, really, a couple of thousand years. And they died out and the Aztecs took over and things like this. So, but before that, going back to like a couple of thousand BC, so 4,000 years ago, you have a culture called the Olmec, who were very prevalent and flourishing along the Gulf Coast. And they built many amazing monuments. But the weird thing about them is that they built all these massive stone heads, some weighing up to 40 tons. Incredibly finely carved out of basalt, very hard volcanic rock. And the weird thing is they all had African features rather than traditional native Central American features. And this is very clear when you look at them. You can't deny that they look like they're sort of West African or something like this. But even the archaeologists will still say that's what the native people look like in Mexico. It's obviously not the case, because some of the other carvings, for instance, look like white people with beards, and you don't get naturally you don't get men with facial hair in Central America. So this again poses more questions. I mean, who were these people? Where did they come from? And then you start looking at the legends of that area, and in fact the legends all over Mexico and the whole of Central America, they all refer back to Quetzalcoatl and his followers arriving, and they all had beards, and they had people working with them from looks like they were from different cultures from around the planet. So there's this whole origins of civilization there, very weird and very interesting, and really haven't been worked out who exactly these people were. And it's something I'm researching as we speak, and I'm going to be working on a book next year about that, because it's not really been looked at thoroughly. There's hardly any books out about these particularly ancient cultures.
And when you look at the mythology, it really is kind of, let me stop and re-question. When you look at Western mythology and then look at mythology that comes out of, and I'm going to say the Americas, on the surface it seems very different, but when you really start digging into it, it's also at the same time very similar.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is something that comes up with this Quetzalcoatl, for instance, or also known as Ku Klux. And so there's these different names and terminology and sort of legendary, because basically that means the plumed serpent or the feathered serpent. And the legend states he and his band of followers arrived in a raft of serpents in a place called Coatzacoalcos, which is on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, and that Coatzacoalcos actually means serpent sanctuary. And they arrived, and they one of the terms they named it was foam from the sea, and they hovered and made no noise in their boat that moved across the sea with no rowers or oars. And so that sounds like a sort of a motorized boat to me, but we're talking about, several thousand years BC possibly here. And they came and they interacted with all the native populations. They're very tall, sort of white beards, bright blue eyes kind of beings. Some people even say they were Irish or, something like this. It's really bizarre, but these legends are all there, and you can't, they're everywhere in Mexico and Guatemala. And they taught, and they kind of interacted, and they learned the languages, they taught the art of megalithic construction, agriculture, and the higher arts and sciences. And then you get the same legends, exactly the same legends, almost word for word, in all the different cultures down in Peru and Bolivia, where like the plumed serpent, it means Viracocha there. So again, it's the plumed serpent people again, the feathered serpent people. Again, same stories, the foam from the sea, they arose from the lake Titicaca. Others say they came from the sky, they were sky beings. And again, taught all the arts of megalithic construction and the sciences and the arts again to all the people there. And they had all these magical powers. And then you start looking around the world and you realize, yeah, you're right. You mentioned just a minute ago that you do find the same legends around the world. You get similar legends of Enki in the Sumerian civilization, Osiris and Thoth in the Egyptian civilization. You get the Fomorians or the Tuatha De Danann, these early civilizations of Ireland. You get some Native American legends in various parts of North America that say the same thing. You even get that in New England. There's even a story from New England interestingly, around the sites in New York State that say that these very tall, fair-skinned peoples arrived and built the first megalithic chambers, and they could summon energies from the sky, and they arrived on boats, and they were very powerful beings, and they disappeared again. And again, all the legends, even in Mexico, South America, Egypt, everywhere else, that these great beings left again after so many years and promised to return. When this is where it gets weird. When Hernan Cortez arrived in Mexico in the 1500s, 1510 I think it was, he arrived on the same coast as Quetzalcoatl did, according to legend, and they were tall, fair-skinned people with beards on boats. And so they thought it was Quetzalcoatl returning. And strangely, one of the legends stated that he would return in a certain, Mayan calendar year at a certain time, and they just happened to arrive at that time. So they got welcomed into the landscape, and all the Aztecs kind of welcomed him, thinking it was the return of Quetzalcoatl. And the Spanish cottoned onto this and managed to destroy the Aztec Empire with that advantage. And the same thing happened with Pizarro down in Peru and South America as well, where they had the advantage because everyone thought it was the return of Viracocha. So you see how powerful, how long these ancient legends and nostalgia of these people who first, came to Mexico and South America held sway for thousands of years. Almost every culture in Central America and South America still talked about these gods that originally were there thousands of years before. So you realize that there was something in it. They weren't just legends. They weren't just folklore myths. They were real people, and it must have been maybe 10,000 years ago, maybe 8,000 years ago, something like that. All over the world, you have these legends of the serpent people and the dragon people in China, and in England, you have the dragon as well. So I'm starting to look into that as a kind of area of research for the book about the Americas. But yeah, there's something going on there, which hopefully I'm going to find a lot more about when I head down to South America.
Well, and I think Brian Forrester and David Childers are doing some really exciting work with the elongated heads in Paracas. You mentioned that the legend said that they were white and had red hair, and some of the skulls, actually quite a few of them that they have found, have red hair.
That's right. I mean, this is very odd. because, that would suggest they were fair-skinned, which is odd from that part of the world. But you actually get that in China. They found some very tall skeletons that appear to have fair skin and with red hair, and even like sort of tartan, sort of Irish or Scottish type clothing that somehow survived because they were mummified. So whoever these people were is still a mystery. They were either giants, they were longheads, as Brian and David talk about in their new book. And we're actually, I'm meeting up with Brian and David for a tour we're doing down there in November. We're going to explore and do a little bit of extra exploring before and after the tour, and see if we can find any more clues to this mystery.
I'm jealous. But anyway, the structures that are found, well, let me change the question. Most people are familiar with the pyramids, and you've talked about the heads, the Olmec heads. Are there structures that they have found that are the Cyclopedian stonework in Mesoamerica?
Yeah, you do get that. Yeah, you do get the massive megalithic blocks in certain parts of Mexico, mainly with the Olmec culture. That's the thing. The later Mayan culture, who were really influenced by the Olmecs. The Olmecs were kind of like the really classed as the mother culture, the sort of the real kind of teachers and the real megalithic kind of peoples. Even though it's the earliest dating for them is only around 2000 BC, 1800 BC, and it's all along the Gulf Coast again. But you do get lots of sites that they think they were Olmec, that people think are Mayan. That like one of the earliest structures at Tikal, for instance, in Guatemala, is now thought to be an Olmec pyramid, the Lost World pyramid, and even Cholula, which is actually pretty much the largest pyramid in the world, although it was dedicated to Quetzalcoatl, I think the Olmecs may have built that originally, and that's in Puebla, which is southeast of Mexico City. And then you have Quilquilco as well, which that's actually in the confines of Mexico City. It's like a circular stepped pyramid, and that's supposedly the earliest known pyramid in the Americas, possibly the world. The original dating of that goes back to about 8,000 years ago, because they dated the lava flows over it. And you get up in the hills south of Mexico City, you do get Olmec carvings as well. But there's some sites, there's two sites which are particularly megalithic. Well, three actually. Well, all the Olmec sites are because of the Cyclopean heads. Some of them are huge, and they have, megalithic stonework in various parts of their temple structures, especially at La Venta. But you go into sort of Oaxaca area, which is south of the Gulf Coast region, on the way, in the thin part of a thin sort of stretch across the middle of Mexico. As you go into Oaxaca, just near there is a place called Monte Alban, and another site called Mitla. And these have very large stones, very big megalithic, kind of almost Stonehenge-type trilithons with the big lintels going across the top with the uprights. And they're much bigger and more, really they are much bigger than many of the Mayan temples. I mean, even like the biggest, if you're talking about size here, the biggest stonework I've seen really in most of Central America that's Mayan is actually at Palenque, but even they're not that big. It's really the Olmec and the earliest cultures around, some people say they're Toltec, but they're kind of a bit later culture really. And there's people saying they're the Mixtec culture, and other names given to various tribes and cultures there. And even Teotihuacan, that's a particularly interesting site, obviously. That's a huge, amazing site. And there's even thought now that might be an Olmec site as well. So there's a lot of kind of shifts happening in studying that part of the world. And I think that's probably relevant considering we're heading into 2012, which is the end date of the long count calendar. Because the start date of the long count calendar is 3114 BC. And, so someone must have been there really to start that calendar, because it was all based around the sites in Mexico and Guatemala. So I find that really interesting. That particular date, it began 3114 BC, because that suggests that people were around then to start the calendar. And I think Quetzalcoatl and his followers, and they were linked with the Olmec, and they kind of developed culture there, really. And they were kind of international travelers as such. and they were relocating and moving around the planet and mapping and creating all these sites and teaching and all this. It was all very positive and compassionate, I believe. But that date of 3,100 around that time BC is the same date, the same decade as the first pharaoh in ancient Egypt, Menes, or the Scorpion King. That is the first known, the pharaonic age began the same time as that long count calendar began, with the one that ends next year. And also you have the megalithic explosion going on around the world. Everyone's building all these sites all over the world at that particular time, especially in Europe. So there's something going on then, which, I'm happy to discuss, but there's something going on then which, again, I need to get down to that part of the world to investigate. But I think it's definitely, worth considering that, especially as it's now been proven that the Olmecs definitely were the first people to work with the long count calendar, and I think they created the long count calendar. And there's evidence they were using the Harb calendar, which is a 365-day calendar, and also they were the first people and the first references with them using the Zolkin calendar, which is the 260-day sacred cycle. And there's evidence more and more, it keeps coming out that they were the ones doing it, especially at a place called Tres Zapotes, which is, again, around that whole Gulf Coast region. So it seems like they invented these calendars, or someone did just before them, possibly Quetzalcoatl. And then they worked with the peoples of the land, the Mayans, and they developed it to a much higher degree as the decades and centuries rolled by. And this is evident, now when evidence of these calendars is resurfacing.
I want to back up a minute. You started talking about a round pyramid that was covered by lava flow that they dated to like 8,000 years ago or 8,000 BC?
That's a place called Quilquilco, and that's in just on the confines. You can actually get there by the subway in Mexico. Originally, this is very weird. So originally, the first dating of that done back the early last century. They did some dating on it because there's a volcano not that far from there. And when they dated it, they found evidence that the lava flow, which you can date, I think, because it's carbon and everything, the carbon-14, and got the date of around 8,000 maybe.
Okay, I think we just lost Hugh. All right. Okay, everybody. Actually, why don't we go to a commercial break, and we'll be back after these words from our sponsors.
Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages. And now back to Just Energy Radio with Dr. Rita Louise.
Hello and welcome back to Just Energy Radio. I'm Dr. Rita Louise, and we have Hugh back, so we're going to continue on with our interview. Hugh, you just had started talking about the pyramids and the lava flows. Could you just kind of pick up where you left off?
Sure, yeah. Well, we're talking about Quilquilco, which is this circular pyramid site in the confines of Mexico City. And, basically, I mean, I'm not sure where we dropped out just then, but basically they've dated it twice in the early 1900s. Firstly, to about 6,000 or 7,000 BC, and secondly, to about 2,000 or more BC. So even those dates suggest it's much, much older than originally they should be in that part of the world. Really, it's definitely the oldest one there. We're looking at the kind of much older area than is accepted, but even today officially they date it as like 200 AD. So they won't even admit that there's something much more prehistoric going on in that part of the world, which is a real pity because there's a lot of evidence to suggest it was an amazing prehistoric thriving metropolis throughout Mexico and Guatemala.
But how can they reconcile 7,000 BC and 2,000 BC? I mean, that's just not even close.
Yeah, it's basically because of the different, they're picking different samples to test. That's all it boils down to, I think. So originally they dated the sort of, I think the topmost part of the lava flow. So it was clearly on top of the pyramid. So the pyramid must have been there when the lava went on it. And so when they dated that, that's when they got this extremely old date. I think when they dated the second batch, this is much, much later, a few decades later, I can't remember when exactly, there was a whole other, basically it was like around the side of the pyramid, or sort of where it's sort of fallen through into a hole. So that's when they got the other date, and then even since then they've retested it and got different dates and this, that, and the other. So, but then when you look in the museum now on site, which is you can just visit there. You can go on the subway to get there. In Mexico, it's brilliant, and really easy to get around there. They've got Olmec artifacts there. There's clearly Olmec pendants. There's these spirals, this certain symbolism I keep finding in different parts of the world, exactly the same symbolism with these triple and double spirals, which I think is to do with earth energies and telluric currents and how they move around. You get that there as well. So it looks like it may have been an Olmec site as well. So now this is kind of, officially it's not. Officially there aren't many Olmec sites, and there's only one left you can really visit and see the magnitude of their temple complex, which is way up back on the Gulf Coast, which is a place called La Venta. It's hard to get to, the Olmec sites, I must admit. They're not easy. They're not on the tourist trail at all. So we are actually thinking of doing a tour there, probably in early 2013, just to make sure, hopefully everything will be all right by then. But just to sort of go there, and maybe we're going to ask David Hatcher-Childress to join us, and we're going to have a look around, or just particularly Olmec sites, some of the ones all the ones we've been talking about today, really, because the Mayan stuff's interesting. But to me, it's got, I'm pulled to this more, profound, more ancient civilization that were behind the Mayan emergence, the Olmec. So it should be, there's still a lot to explore there, I must admit, yeah.
How do these structures compare to some of the cyclopedic structures like in Peru or in other, countries? Well,
let's just, if you're looking at Britain, France, Ireland, Egypt, Peru, you've got massive megalithic construction. I mean, it's awesome. It's really quite, you can't really understand how they could have possibly done that. And you get some of that with the Olmec sites, some of that, especially the Olmec heads, because they're big, they're really big, and they're beautifully cut. How they did that is just beyond, thinking about. They've obviously just got a massive, rough-hewn piece of rock. And somehow they managed to carve, and they're all individual faces. Like 17 of these heads have been discovered yet. But you've got to understand that they kind of carved it from a big rough-hewn piece of rock and managed to get it perfect somehow. No one knows how they could have done it. And they dragged these stones or transported them somehow from the Tuxtla Mountains, which are 20 or 30 miles away, at least. Some of the sites are 80 miles away. So how they did that is just incredible. And some of the blocks, some of the stelae and standing stones that they were working with as well are pretty impressive. And they really do remind me of, some places in Peru. The thing you get in Peru, really, and Egypt, and also you get this in Italy as well, strangely, and also in a couple of other places, and then the Mediterranean. You have this massive megalithic construction where they build these walls, these massive, what they call polygonal walls, where the pieces are like irregular shaped pieces, but precision cut with straight edges, but irregularly shaped, and they kind of slot together like a toy pieces, or like a jigsaw. And you get that a lot. You don't really get that in Mexico too much, but you get that in Peru, and you get that in Egypt. But there's evidence in some of the Olmec sites, you see the same kind of construction. You see this, not necessarily polygonal, but you see the same quality and the same magnitude of the stonework. So I think, you definitely do get that there. And I think as you head into South America, I mean, you go down, say you go down from the Gulf Coast, you head south, you go through a place called Izapa, Then you head over into the Guatemalan area and southern Guatemala. You have several sites. There's one called El Baal, there's Finca, Las Illusions, and a few others. And there's lots of megalithic stuff there as well. Very big, huge stones, heads, and all this other kind of stuff. But it's definitely worth checking out. And then if you head further south, you go through Honduras and you get into Nicaragua. There's some interesting stones down there, which I'm going to check out when I go there in November and December. And then Costa Rica, you get these massive stone spheres, which are huge, and I'm going to go and visit them, because I think the Olmecs may have travelled down, or the Viracochans may have travelled up from South America, one or the other, or they were part of the same culture. So there's all these similarities and things happening, which really I'm very excited about exploring.
Actually, somebody had posted, and I shared it on Facebook, these boulders that they found in New Zealand, and I'm going to try the pronunciation, the Moraki boulders, Moeraki, Moraki boulders, but they're round. They're in New Zealand, and they just line up on the beach. I mean, there's some weather erosion on them, and they said, they formed in the water, and I'm like, they look like the ones in Costa Rica. But they look huge, and there's just a bunch of them. I've seen photos of them, actually. Yeah, I mean, that's intriguing, but I really need to go and inspect them, have a look at them, see what's going on, because there are some, there's been lots of these stone spheres pop up everywhere. There's a whole load of them, actually, were found in Los Angeles when they were building the trams and all that kind of stuff, early last century, or even late 1800s, I'm not sure when. A load of these out of one of the hills they were excavating and sort of, building this tram through. A load of these massive stone spheres sort of popped out, but like the ones in Costa Rica. And then even in Bosnia, I've just been to Bosnia in Europe, they supposedly found these sort of pyramid sites down that way. And we went to look at this site a couple of hours away from where these other sites are. And there's all these stone spheres in this whole valley. Really, some of them, none of them are actually precision perfect, though. So I get a sense some of them might be natural, but the ones in Costa Rica are supposedly, and I haven't been there yet, I'm going in a couple of months though, are really beautifully carved pieces of rock, and they're precision engineered, really. And there's lots of research done on that by a couple of books out on it, saying they were like markers, and they were like part of a kind of great survey of that part of the world, possibly the planet, like an Earth grid, or they were kind of navigational tools. Whatever they were amazing, and these mysteries and these megalithic sites keep popping up. New discoveries are being made all the time. So it's a very exciting time to be, traveling about and exploring. Yeah. This came to me when I was kind of thinking up some questions and where I wanted to go with this interview. And, for example, there's all of the cyclopedian structures in Peru. But do they have pyramids? And let me even just add on to that. It seems like where you find the massive stone structures, you don't necessarily find pyramids, or is that not correct?
Not necessarily. Obviously, you get them in Egypt. You get pyramids and the big stones. Everything. You get everything in Egypt. Peru, you do get pyramids. Yeah, there's a place called Caral, which is north of Lima. In about 200 kilometers north, I think. I actually went there when I went last time, and there's pyramids there, and some of them roughly the same date as the ones in Egypt, about 2600 BC. And they keep finding more down there. And then you head further south down in Peru, mainly these are all west coast kind of sites, which is much hotter, which is much lower altitude there, so almost sea level. And you get Nazca and all that area the further south you go, the Nazca lines, all the elongated skulls, Paracas and things like that. But in that kind of area, I think north and south of Nazca, the pyramids are being found down there as well, which again date to this kind of era or possibly older. But yeah, you do get pyramidical structures really in the more classical parts of Peru, like around Cuzco and other sites. And I mean, the way they were working with stone there is just unbelievable. I mean, it's baffling, to all the experts who've looked at it, to me, to Brian, to David Hatcher-Childress. It's like, what is going on here? How on earth did they do that? And apparently the Incas didn't even know how they did it or who even built them. They were just sort of some lost race of the Viracochans or whatever. And so there's some, even they really didn't have a clue. And there's actually one story, Brian's been on your show to talk about this, but where one of the Inca kings actually tried to move the equivalent, one of the large stones at Sacsayhuaman, which is up on the hills above Cusco. They decided to try and move one from where they originally came from using the techniques they knew then, which is like 800 years ago or something. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't move one stone, the Incans, and they were struggling and they couldn't do it. And it was like, oh my God. Apparently people got crushed under it. They had these nightmare situations. So it shows you that it's almost like the further we go back, the more sophisticated and intelligent and amazing and, advanced these cultures become. And there's a lot of evidence for that on different perspectives of how you can study these particular cultures.
That just makes me laugh. There was a show on TV, and they took this cement block, and they were trying to move it on some rollers to, like, prove a theory, not prove a theory. They had a hoist. Well, when they did it on the wooden rollers, it kind of rolled on the rollers and then banged into something, and a big old chunk of the cement broke off. And if it was made out of limestone, boom, send that one back for repair. It makes me laugh. I think it's even funnier, though, that they were doing the same thing, trying to figure out how it got done 800 years ago with obviously the same success we're having now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, and going back to the Olmecs, there was a TV program, a famous. It's become this legendary kind of laughable TV program called Horizon in England, which is the science program of the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation, and it's the big one. And they always do something to try and seem really clever, and like they're more, we know everything. We're scientists, we're academics, and they went to the Olmec region around the Gulf Coast, and one of the two tasks they had, this is really funny. They tried to move an equivalent size stone, like 20-ton stone, that could be carved into a head shape from the Tuxtla Mountains to one of the areas where the Olmecs obviously had moved it, 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. And they just could not do it. They had these top engineers, they had people there trying to get it all moved, and they were working it all out mathematically, trying to use the same tools the Olmecs may have used. They couldn't move it. They moved it about 100 yards in about 10 days or something like that, and then everything broke and they gave up. And then this other guy, this top guy from a Scottish university, who was an expert sculptor who specialised in hard stone and ancient cultures, there was a block of stone. He was like, I can do this. I can make this Olmec head. I can do this beautiful, intricate carving, no problem. And he couldn't even with the tools he had, it was too hard for him to even get anywhere near creating even a face or nose on the block. Again, in about 10-day or 2-week period. So it became, and then at the end of the program, they were just like, oh well, I've got no idea how they did it. And so it became it's become like this legendary thing on the internet where, it makes you realize what we're dealing with here. There's a whole other level, which we're just starting to get our heads around again in this kind of era.
I'm looking at the clock. We have about 9 minutes, 10 minutes, but I've been wanting to get to this question, but you've been so fascinating that I haven't got there. But why did they build these? Do you have any idea of why or thoughts about why they built some of these structures in the first place?
Oh, that is the big question we battle with at Megalithomania every year, to be honest with you. Why they built them? It's like the sort of $1 million question. I think how they built them is the $1 billion question, because if you suss that one out, that'd be quite amazing.
Today's economy, it has to be at least $10 trillion.
Quite possibly. But yeah, I mean, reasons for these sites. If we look at like England, for instance, and we look at the sites of New England I talked about earlier, some very interesting tests have been carried out by John Burke and the BLT research team up in Boston. And before that, there was research from Philip Callahan and Lana Moore. That's brilliant work in Australia. And they've realized the energies at these sites are probably, partly, if not entirely, what these sites were built for. because they're often built upon magnetic anomalies where there's this electric charge naturally builds up in them. The energy gets trapped inside these chambers and these megalithic sites. Even on like mounds and pyramids, it fluctuates the earth energies around. It's still been scientifically tested now. Although dowsers and geomancers have known this for hundreds of years. They knew about these earth energies and the fact that ancient sites sort of integrated and sort of worked with them. So it seems like what they found was, I'll just summarise this quickly, so we've got a few minutes left. John Burke and his team put seeds inside some of these chambers, in the entrance to some of these chambers, because that's where their equipment was picking up the most energy. And so when they put the seeds in, they knew that kind of energy should charge the seeds. So when they left the seeds in for an hour, 2 hours, did different tests, and they grew them against controls that hadn't been in the chamber. Every time, especially on the most ancient sites, they got results that the seeds and the crops would grow 3 times, sometimes 3 times as much yield. They would grow faster, they'd be frost resistant, and they'd be bigger. And so it's almost like you get more for your money if you put your seeds inside a megalithic site. If you know where the energy spot is, you have to know where the energy spot is, and you have to know how long to put it in for, and know what time of day and year is the best. And this is obviously why they built megalithic sites as calendars, like stone circles and things like this. So that's one purpose, I think, that it was like a fertility technology to make sure that their way of life, their kind of agricultural way of life, maintained itself for future generations. Obviously, I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. If you want to know why these sites were built, I think there's a whole other. That's just probably 1% or 10% at the most of their purpose. I think they were multi-purpose sites where you'd use them for many different things. You could use them; they could be marker points on a grid. They could connect energies between one site to another, which could be used by the shamans for sort of consciousness and shamanic practice. You can control the movement of underground water by putting stones in the ground and things like this, so you can get build-ups of water. You can harmonize the energies with these sites. They're like star maps, so it's like mapping the stars onto the surface of the planet. Use them as calendar devices so you can track, what time of year and even what time of day it is sometimes. And I think these are some of the things that traditionally this is what they were used for, and it's starting to make sense that there's a much more subtle, a much more interesting, and shamanic way that they worked back in these times, and that's probably the purposes that are sort of built around that kind of mindset.
I think that idea about the fertility chambers is really interesting because there's myths that come out that say that when Viracocha was there, the crops grew overnight or they grew in a week, and the Spanish couldn't figure out how that possibly could be so. But if they were using some kind of technology, maybe it is. Yeah, I agree. I really think that it's a lot to do with technology. It's like magic and technology and magic and science, whatever however you want to look at it, were the same thing back then. It was all connected. They kind of had an intuitive understanding of these energies and where to put things. It's like a geomancer would. You intuitively know what to do and where to put things and how to operate. And and maybe you'd ask the gods for guidance, and this, that, and the other. And actually, you're just tuning in. And I think you're right. There's something going on. And amazingly, some of these sites still work. That's what blows my mind. The fact that they work. You can go there now, 5,000 years later, sometimes, and they still work. I mean, that is amazing in itself. And what technology today is going to be working in 5,000 years' time? No comment. How do you think our ancestors figured all of this out?
Again, if they figured it out or not, I don't know. I mean, it seems like I said, was there an intuitive understanding of that? Because this knowledge had to come from somewhere, I mean, you could gradually learn it over hundreds or thousands of generations, but it seems like there was a time, a golden age of inspiration, where things were kind of channeled and tuned, people tuned in and worked things out. There's talk of the whole ancient aliens thing, of course. That's probably part of the picture. But I go along with the fact that, as human beings, we go through cycles, large cycles of consciousness expansion and awareness and intelligence. And we were obviously going through one way back then when all this stuff was coming out. And, I think, the mind we have now is pretty amazing. As human mind is awesome, in fact. And so there's no reason why it couldn't have been the same or more so back in that time. Look what we've created today. It's pretty amazing, the technology just to sit here and do an interview with you over, thin air, like the internet, it's awesome, incredible. And so, there's no reason that kind of technology, but, from a different mindset and for different purposes with different intentions, that high level of technology wasn't available to them. But then I think it really must have been.
Well, but there are things that they've done that we can't figure out how to do or don't know how to do or have to employ all of this stuff to make it happen. And we find no evidence of their tools.
Yeah, that's another very interesting point there, actually. A traditional, archaeologist or whatever would say, well, if they did use tools, they probably used metal, and it's probably disintegrated by now, which is a fair point. But it doesn't explain how you transport a 400-ton megalithic block several miles up a mountainside like you did in Peru. It doesn't answer that question. And so a lot of questions are still there, and this is one of the reasons, we all get together at these conferences and we discuss it, and we new research comes out, and there's a lot of talk about which makes sense to me, is this whole idea of kind of levitation of stone. I think we shouldn't really overlook that. I think we should look at that again, because I think with the technology we're developing, especially when you look at the Hutchinson effect and the work that guy's been doing in America, you can do things with sound and vibration and things like that, and actually, make stone work for you. And it was done as recently as the 1950s and 60s in Coral Castle in Florida. By Edward Liscownin, where he built a whole megalithic complex, like a village. He raised and cut over 1,000 tons of stone himself, and he was a 5-foot Latvian. So if he can do that, then I'm sure some of us could do it as well. And I think we need to, start looking at the more subtle energies and magnetism to possibly find the answer to that.
Isn't it sad that we've lost all of that knowledge? And it makes me wonder, how far back was it that we lost it?
Yeah, it's a bit sad. In a way, it's sad, but in another way, which I think is, the way I like to look at it, is it makes it interesting, and it makes it mysterious, and it gives you a challenge to focus on and to try and go in there. But it's almost like they've, the ancients, they were our ancestors. Remember, they were part of our bloodlines. They put stuff into the landscape and built these temples and ancient sites. And they knew they were going to last. They knew that no one was going to be able to move them easily in thousands of years later. And so, we've got a connection with our ancestors still, which I think is really important. And so I think there's, different ways of looking at it. We have lost something, but it gives us the intention and the kind of need to kind of stretch back to that time and connect with our family and our relatives and our ancestors. So I think there's, different ways to approach that, I think, yeah.
Hugh, our time is up, and I have to let you go. But I'm hoping that you will come back and visit us again.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd love to.
That would be great. And so your webpage is...
Yes, megalithomania.co.uk. That's the general website, but we've got loads of articles and videos, and people can download things on there. And megalithomerica.com, and people can check out the conference in October 21st and 23rd. And please come along. And we're going to be live streaming it as well, so people can watch it online.
Cool. All right, Hugh. Till next time. I will talk to you again soon.
Thanks so much. I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot.
Great. And we'll be back with Philip Coppens after these words from our sponsors.
Just Energy Radio with your host, Dr. Rita Louise, will return right after these messages.